I'm Rita Mae Reese. I'm a poet and the director of Arts and Literature Laboratory, and this is The Layered Onion. I don't really think of it as finding my voice so much. I think this is true with kids and creativity and their artistic talents too. It's not losing it, and so not forgetting what you sound like. And I think just taking a delight in the way the people around me talk and sound. My family loves to play with language. Even though I'm the first person in my family to graduate from high school, they still love to read. They love to play with words. And I grew up in that atmosphere. And it definitely came through when I discovered that poetry was something that I could participate in. I didn't think of it that way up until like my first year in college. And then it was just like discovering this huge playground that I was allowed into. Originally, I was a math major that lasted about a semester. Then I was an art major and that lasted about a semester. And one day, he was the head of the art department. He literally flung Ms. magazines at me and said, "Why don't you go somewhere and read these?" And I thought, I can't stay in this program. And I walked across the quad to the English department, and it was all these mostly great women, who one of them had been an archer in the Olympics. And I was just like, this feels like my people. I'm staying here. I love to read. Why not? Mm-hmm. So, that was how that started. Then I dropped out of school for a long time. I went to work for a lesbian press for about 7 years. And then one of the authors who was visiting from Australia kind of badgered me for about 6 hours in a row. And she's like, "You have to go back to school. This is ridiculous." And so I did. I went back to school, and one of my professors said, "Have you ever thought about poetry?" And I laughed at her and said, "That's not a career," And then I felt bad because I was like, okay, maybe it is for you, but that's not a real career. And she said, "You're right. It's not a career. It's a lifestyle. And I think you would really like the lifestyle." And then it really clicked for me because I was like, I never really wanted a career. I thought I had to have one, but a lifestyle sounds great. Yeah, I would like that lifestyle. Probably when I first went to college at West Virginia State College, there was a, college magazine, college journal, and I had a story published in that. And I remember a student I didn't know came up to me and said, "I read your story. We were talking about it in class." And that was just the most amazing experience. And I was like, wow, I hope that happens again sometime. I think there is a part of me that really, I don't like exclusionary work. But I also don't feel like you have to explain everything to the reader. There's a value that the Southern Review, the journal Southern Review, really champions, and that's generosity in the work. And so I want to make room for the reader. I never want to make them feel stupid or like they have to look things up. I want them to find something in the poem for them. And I really think sometimes that writing is like this act of magic because you're creating an experience. You're not just creating like a set of facts or information. You're creating an experience using only language for a total stranger. You know nothing about their background, but you're hoping to get them to share this experience with you. And so I'm mindful of the reader in that way, that I want to make space for them on the page. A lot of times when I'm reading or I see a word, I recognize something in it that I hadn't seen before. Connection to another. It's like recognizing an old friend from school or something. You're like, oh, there you are. Like, what is new? Like the word curation. I work in an arts nonprofit, and so we think about curation a lot, and you think about it as gatekeeping. But when I really looked at the word, I could see the word cure is at the beginning. And so at its root, it means caretaking. But it is not something that we associate with the word now. And so a lot of poetry, I think, is, somebody will say it's taking the familiar and making it unfamiliar, or taking the unfamiliar and making it familiar. And what happens with some words like love and other things that are very familiar, these things get kind of shellacked on top of that word so that we lose sight of their meaning, the deep experience of it. And I feel like it's poets' jobs to kind of clear away the layers that are getting in the way of really experiencing what that word means. It was this fella who was looking for someone to do poetry. He wanted it to be spoken word, included on this album that's a tribute to Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard, who are amazing musicians. And Hazel Dickens grew up in West Virginia. And so he was looking... Yes, and as did I. And so he was really looking for someone who valued her work and could maybe speak to it in poetry. And somehow he found my name. And it was during COVID that he reached out. And so I had the time and definitely the interest in Hazel Dickens. And so... And, you know, with no music ability at all, the idea of being able to be part of a bluegrass band and not have to learn any music sounded fantastic. I do have a banjo. I can't really play it. We try to do a lot of collaborative efforts between the arts at Arts and Literature Laboratory. And one of the things that we do is the Midwest Video Poetry Fest, which combines film and poetry. I'm always looking for ways to get poetry out of the books, because those are often so obscure and you don't come across poetry books very often. The library can't afford to keep that many of them. So the average person, they are kind of secreted away and they don't come across poetry in their daily lives. But I feel like video poetry is such a natural fit for our age because the younger generations have this natural visual fluency. They understand images in a deep way that we never had access to. And so I think for them, interpreting language visually makes total sense and lets them connect to work like Emily Dickinson in a really deep and meaningful way. Originally, I got interested in video poetry because there was this series called The United States of Poetry that Bob Hallman did for PBS many years ago. And it basically took poems and treated them like music videos, sort of. Not the crazy hair that we had with the beginning of MTV or any of those things, but it had people like Thylias Moss and Leonard Cohen and poets that I came to admire very much. And so I thought, wow, it really connected me deeply to poetry and made me want to one day do that. The way my video poem came about was this commercial agency contacted me by email out of the blue and said, we want to do an animation of a poem, and we thought your poem, The Alphabet Conspiracy, would be a great fit because we want to show off our animation skills at this conference that's coming up. And they were sort of like, and if you don't want to do it, we'll find somebody else. That's fine. And I was like, if you want to do it, go ahead, you know. That's fine. I didn't think they would do it, really. Like, I never expected anything to come out of it. And when they sent me the files like a year later, I was amazed. It was really cool. And with the Midwest Video Poetry Fest, we started it in 2020. And we had over 1,600 submissions from all over the world. I mean, we've had work from more than 93, 94 countries now. And so it's really this great way to see into the experiences and languages of different cultures. All of them have, English captions so people can kind of understand literally what's happening. But it's just amazing work. There was one from Iran of these birds that was just like a mandala flowing in and out. It was just mesmerizing and beautiful. So I feel really lucky that we get to see this work from all over the world and then share it, here in Madison. Julie Frankie actually was a neighbor, lived across the street, and I'd seen some of their work and thought they were wonderful, but they were doing their work as their day job. And so as a graphic artist, they sort of lost touch with the artist part of themselves. And I really love the idea of graphic poetry as well. and tried to come up with something on my own, and it just wasn't good. And I said, would you mind taking a look at this work and seeing if you could create some illustrations for it? And then we didn't talk about it for a long time. I remember seeing them in a grocery store one time, and they sort of avoided me, and I thought, oh, they really hate my work and they want to pretend this never happened. And then I'd submitted the book for publication, and I hadn't heard back from the artist. And so I reached out and said, if there's any chance you're interested in doing this, now would be the time to let me know. And they said, oh, yes, I was just going to send you these files. And they sent over the images that I loved. And then the next thing was getting the press to agree to include those in the book, which they readily agreed to, which was great. We've got this space here on Livingston Street, which is 3 levels and allows us to have artist studios, have a large education studio for our summer camps for youth, our classes for adults, senior sewing camps, which is great. It's so wonderful to see. We have it for English speakers and Spanish speakers, and it's a delight. And we also do film screenings, art exhibitions, poetry readings. So we've been doing this in that space. We moved in March of 2020, and it's getting more active every day with events, people coming in, discovering it for the first time still, which is always fun to see. We talk with the staff and our community. We really pay attention to what people are looking for, what sort of exciting new things could happen here that maybe hasn't found a venue yet. And we're really focusing now not on doing more, because there's only so many days in the year. We can't really do more, but on having a bigger impact with the things that we do. So we are looking closely at our programs, but I love all of them. I can't think of anything that I would totally cut, Absolutely. Yeah. And I love it when people come in, they've come there for a jazz concert, but they see that we offer writing classes. We have a fellow who came to all at the old space. He came for a concert. He saw the classes. He started taking classes. He's gone on to teach our poetry classes for us. He's on our Lab 4 curatorial team. So we really have invested in the people, and the way that they grow and experience things is reflected in the organization itself, because I don't think anyone is just one art form. So many people are interested in music and they also write, or they're a filmmaker, but they also have done painting. And so what we want to do is connect the different art forms within each person, but also connect people to each other throughout those different forms. I think especially this last cohort, they had their show in late November and December, and just the way they supported each other, and hearing them talk to each other, and they showed up for each other all the time, and they're so close. I would love to see more of that happening. We would like to start that for writers as well. And Shell Ramos, who is one of the ones in the last Bridgework exhibition, said she had been painting alone in her house at her kitchen table and was starting to wonder, should I really call myself an artist? I feel like a fake. I'm not, doing anything meaningful. And then she was able to connect with other artists, and then she had that exhibition, and it just transformed the way she saw herself, which is such a key part of really claiming yourself as an artist. I think so many people are afraid to. Mm-hmm. When I say, are you a writer? Most people say, no, I write, but I'm not really a writer, because they don't feel they've been given that permission yet to say that. That's a question that I've struggled with from time, because it feels, poet in particular, even more than writer, feels like an honorific title that you can't claim for yourself. Like other people have to call you that, and then you can say whether you agree or not, I guess. Writer, to me, feels almost more commercial, I guess, because they do have the option of getting paid. But so that feels like if that's your goal, you know, like I'm going to publish a novel, I'll say I'm a writer. You can do that. But as a poet, you have to have at least one other person agree with you that you're a poet. I think getting poetry in front of people more. So we have a lending library at all. And I've really been touched by how many people will wander over to it and pick up a book of poetry. We had an art reception the other night that a fella came to, and there was a display, and he picked up the poetry book because it was called Caregivers. And he got very emotional, and he said, I've been a caregiver for the past 8 years, and the person just passed away. And so he was really able to connect deeply to that work, but he never would have come across that in his daily life. So, you know, it's sort of our sneaky way of putting poetry in front of people so that they do have access to it. The poet Muriel Rukeyser said, you know, we need to use all of our resources, and poetry is one of our vital resources. So how do we get people access to that resource? Because they do need it right now. I actually believe that you will need poetry at some time in your life. And if you can't go looking for it and have it be effective at the moment you need it, you need to start finding the poetry that you're going to need later in your life early on. And no one can kind of prescribe it for you. I could know a lot about you, but not know which poets are really going to resonate with you. So you have to be looking. And then when that terrible thing happens to you that you don't have language for, and you feel so alone, you'll be able to look through the poetry that you've gathered over the years, and there'll be that piece there for you, that poem that's going to help you get through the really hard stuff. I'm Rita Mae Reese, a poet and the director of Arts and Literature Laboratory, and this was The Layered Onion.